Well, welcome back to another episode. This time on the Miles Driven, it is the Audi Q5. We're going to start with the first generation and we're going to get straight into it on this one. However, I will just say one thing about the Audi Q5, and that is it's one of the only Audis in existence to be hybrid in every single generation. Now, I know some of you are thinking, hybrid, I don't think on the first generation. Yeah, there is a sort of self-charging hybrid system on the first one that's offered in some markets, like a 1.3 kilowatt hour battery, 2 or 3 miles. Basically 2 miles of range, 3 kilometers of range. That's what you're going to get from it. Just an interesting point, because although a lot of cars have gone hybrid today, and although there are a lot of electric cars that have only ever been electric, there are very few cars that have always had a hybrid option throughout their run. If you think BMW 5 Series, now of course it's got such a long history, definitely doesn't have a hybrid in every generation. Same with, say, an Audi A3. Okay, so this is the 8R generation. It's designed by Christian Winkelmann, and it comes out in 2009 after being shown in 2008. It is originally designed in 2005. So that gives you a little bit of an idea of the timeline. Now, it gets a facelift in 2012, and the SQ5 that sees this model out releases in 2013 before the vehicle then does another 3 years until it is finally sort of brought out of the range in 2016, although some of you will still have the car in 2017 as there's a transition between first and second generation. On the first generation, there's 5 engines. There's a 2 litre petrol, a 3 litre petrol, a 3.2 VR6 petrol. That's the only naturally aspirated engine, by the way. Then there is 2 litre diesel and 3 litre diesel. Okay, so it's a fairly simple lineup, but it is the largest of all lineups because it has 5 engine options. And 2 of these engines are going to go into the SQ5, but we'll come on to those last. Now, 2 litre petrol engine. Why would you go for that over the 2 litre diesel engine? Especially because in this generation of vehicles, diesels are unbelievably popular. They are available in world markets, which is sort of unheard of for diesels before this. Really, diesel is popular in Europe. North America, way behind. They put diesel engines in trucks, and that's about it. And the rest of the world is sort of catching up with their desire for diesel vehicles. But we're sort of in that peak time now. You know, diesel has been accepted in most world markets, and Audi and Volkswagen Group are really sending them everywhere. Why would you go for the petrol today? There's 2 aspects. If you're buying an early one, so everything that is Euro 5 emissions, I should mention, don't fit in most low emission zones around the world. Okay, so that's everything up to 2015, roughly. Sometimes it's 2016, sometimes 2014 cars are Euro 6. But it's something to bear in mind if you're looking for a 2 litre diesel and you regularly have to go into a low emission zone, because if you buy, say, a 2013, 2012, 2011, you're going to be paying whatever fine there is. That's if you can go into those cities at all. So just something to bear in mind on the diesel engine. From the point of view, though, of today, whether the petrol is better than the diesel, part of it comes down to diesel engines of this age. So we're looking at the oldest being 2009, 15, 16 years old. If they haven't had emissions equipment treated, replaced, whatever else, they're going to be due those replacements. And to be honest, when I worked in automotive parts for the short time that I did, these things can stack up, especially, and this is well worth checking before you even look at one, is the part available outside of the main dealer? Okay, so you used to sell car parts. What you'd find is that every now and again, it's a good example, a Porsche Boxster from the early 2000s with a 2.7 engine catalytic converter. I don't think there's any copy parts. I could be wrong on that one. I'm just bringing up, I remember a customer saying to me, oh, well, I'm not a rich man. I've just been able to buy, this fairly now sort of cost-effective way of having a convertible. And I said, well, I appreciate that, but it's still got Porsche badge on it. And so some things are Porsche parts. Now, that isn't the case with everything, but I'm pretty sure he was after a catalytic converter and it was no dice. And from the main dealer, they were still very expensive. Sort of, I would say 8 times what we would expect to sell them for as a pattern part. So it is worth checking before you step into this. Can you get DPF filters, catalytic converters, and EGR valves readily and at a reasonable price? Because they are the things that are going to likely let you down on that diesel engine. There are lots of other things. If you want great detail, you can check out the buyer's guide on the first generation, because that will give you a ton of information on this. But that's something to bear in mind on the diesel. On the petrol side, well, you get about 210 brake horsepower. Generally speaking, there's a little bit variations over the age that you're looking at. And if you go for the hybrid, that steps up to 245 brake horsepower as combined between the electric motor and the engine. The generation of that engine is still being used in brand new cars today, just in sort of later iterations. You know, they always refine engines every 5 or 6 years where they can, where they have the budget to, because all their budget has not been siphoned off to make an electric car, for example. When that's not the case, then yeah, about every 5-6 years, they'll have a look and they'll say, can we get an extra 2 or 3% efficiency, maybe a little bit extra power at the same time? And if they can, then they will. That rule is sort of falling away for some manufacturers, but Volkswagen certainly seem to have kept that going. And so you're in the earlier generation. The earlier one is still pretty good. It's not as good as the later ones, but that's no big issue for you. If you're a bit worried about reliability, I'd say go for a facelift 2-litre petrol than the pre-facelift 2-litre petrol. But I'm splitting hairs a little bit, okay? And I want to be honest about that because I don't want people thinking, oh, well, all the earlier ones are terrible then. No, they're not. It's just that if you can get the revised one after the facelift till 2012, 2013, depending on where you are, that's probably going to be the one that suits you for that little bit longer. And also, being that it will only be 10 or 12 years old rather than 15, 17 years old, it's likely done less mileage and worth that little bit more that it's going to cost you. Interestingly, when I looked on the used market, because people don't all watch these sorts of videos where they know, okay, that year's the facelift and that year's the revised engine and etc, etc. The good thing for you, if you are watching this, they, generally speaking, the price of, say, a 2010 to 2013, it isn't like a big gap. So, for example, if you look at BMW 5 Series, when they have a facelift in the middle, called LCI, it's fairly obvious which one's which. You can tell from the lights. Same for the Q5. You know, you can say, oh, that one's a facelift, that one's not. There's usually a noticeable bump in price for facelift. And that's because they usually get one facelift in the middle of their life, similar to the Q5. But people who buy them have got used to that idea. Oh, okay, the facelift one is usually sort of everything that BMW can throw at that car, usually adds some more specification, removes the base model, and doesn't necessarily always increase the price that greatly when you factor in what you're getting for your money. So people will look out for them, and because of that, demand pushes the prices higher. On the Q5, interestingly, didn't see too much of that. So I would say, unless you're in a market where people know that and there is a big difference, I'd probably step for a petrol that's been revised, say 2012, 2013 onwards, rather than the very early ones. However, find a good one, low mileage, nothing to stop you. If you're looking very, very late, then I'd say, you know, if you say a 2016, diesel could come back into it because it will probably have a little bit more time on its emissions equipment before it's going to need replacing. However, bear in mind, it had to be sold with different emissions equipment, stricter emissions equipment. It does make it Euro 6 compliant if you live in a country where that will make a difference to how much tax you pay, or if you have to pay more to park in areas, or to pay more to enter areas if there's tolls and stuff. However, maintenance may be a little bit more. So just a little bit of a balancing act you'll have to do there. Generally speaking, to just avoid all of that, I would be looking at the 2-litre turbo petrol. They're pretty robust engines. They're well known. Most Volkswagen specialists will probably know them inside out, have about 5 on a shelf somewhere, just ready to strip a part off. So gives you an idea of how to look at those two. The next two engines, not available in all markets in the specification I'm going to talk about. So there's a 3-litre TDI and a 3-litre TFSI. If you can buy it, 3-litre TFSI, 270-ish horsepower. If you can buy it, 3-litre TDI, 250-ish horsepower, 240 actually, I think. These weren't so popular because at the time the 2-litre engines had moved so far forward and there was a price premium to buying a 3-litre. Over the 2-litre, there was also emissions were higher, things like that. Depending on your market, you know, you may find that if you're in the US, you have more 3-litres available than other places. I don't think you get 3-litre TDI though. Could be wrong, but I don't think you get 3-litre TDI. So because of that, I would say they're okay. It's just they're kind of known for going in the SQ5s, heavily reworked versions, going in the SQ5. And honestly, today, I'd probably look at an SQ5 if I wanted a 3-litre. Be a little bit different in some markets. You have the 3-litre petrol and the SQ5 has a diesel engine, so there's your exception to want someone that will want it. But honestly, 2 litres are good at doing what they do. The 3 litres do add some longevity, but they will ask a higher premium in the first place. So it really becomes a bit budget dependent then. And I would say the 2 litres, there's just so many out there, so much choice. I wouldn't spend too much time looking for a 3 litre unless a good one sort of just falls onto your lap. Now, off to the side, let's talk about the 3.2. Doesn't do very long in the Q5, and it's a slight anomaly of an engine because my belief is that Audi's initial thought when they first designed the car back in 2005 was that they could do an S model with the 3.2 and then back away from it. And it looks to me that's what happens with the Q5. They introduce it, it stays as a regular Q5 model. If there'd been sort of really high uptake, maybe they would have kept that engine going. Realistically, emissions laws were pretty hot on its tail, but they do manage to keep it going in some markets. So if you want something a bit funky, sounds a bit different, biggest petrol in the world, but sometimes even I have to admit that's probably overstepping it for sort of your small family SUV like this car. But saying all of that, we're going to step to the SQ5s next. If you're outside of Europe, for the majority of outside of Europe, this is a petrol engine. If you're inside of Europe, this is the diesel engine. Petrol engine, 349 brake horsepower, or 352, can't remember the PS to brake horsepower. Good engine, supercharged SUV. Pretty much unheard of to have supercharged SUVs from Europe. In fact, if I try and think, yeah, I'm completely blanking on another supercharged one. I'm sure someone in the comments will be able to think of one. That's a challenge for you. Now, outside of like even the Mercedes supercharged engines, I don't think they were putting them in the SUVs. They were putting them in the estates. So, and then they switched to turbocharging. So maybe the ML, maybe the early ML. I could be, no, I think that was naturally aspirated. Anyway, wasting your time. Point being that, yeah, quite an individual thing to have. If you can have a supercharged small SUV car, the SQ5 is the one. 6-cylinder V6, 350 horsepower supercharged engine. Same engine that's in the S5, if you're interested in, maybe you've had an S5 before, and that time in life has brought you to the point where you need a family-size vehicle, and you don't want to give up that engine. Well, switch to an SQ5 is the answer there. For the rest of you in Europe, it's an SQ5 diesel. This probably was the car Audi wanted to build, I'll say. It was very odd that they did it with a diesel. The first sort of push out there of saying, let's do an S car with a diesel. But it fit oddly at the time. It was actually, they did a ton of reworking of that 3-litre diesel engine to make it qualifiable in the Audi world as an S engine. And so it's not just, you know, a 3-litre TDI with a remap and off you go. It's something quite unique, quite special. In Audi history, if they weren't so sensitive about talking about the TDI era, for obvious reasons, this would probably be one of those cars that, you know, they would put on their historic fleet and they'd still be talking about. And I think in years to come, it will probably get a second wind of life. I think people, as you know, SQ5 diesel S models came back in 2020. We got them for the S4, the S5 had them. In Europe, they came back in the SQ5. So there was a transition back to it to try and test the market, because people said, actually, you know, I was still interested and I liked my SQ5 in diesel. So Audi did give it a second go, but ultimately we know what happens in the world around that time, and so there's not really a great supply of them. So that's the car. If you say, I want a performance car, I want massive MPG, I want something that Audi have specifically designed for this engine, I don't want something that's just sort of changed and remapped and all this other stuff. Not to put a downer on the petrol one at all. I just think they clearly put a lot of time and effort into the diesel variation. So something to bear in mind if you like the idea of having 2 turbos, a V6 engine, and yet being able to do fuel economy that you'd expect from, you know, a regular sort of commuter car, rather than something that actually, when you put your foot down, sends you down the road with a big wallop of torque behind it. So that's the first generation done. Let's move on to the second generation Audi Q5. And so this is the FY generation. Martin Licht, I think is the correct way to say the designer's name. Interesting one. I'll write his name up there just in case I've said it wrong. Interesting one because we lose an engine, 2 litres, 2 litres petrol, 2 litres diesel, 2 3 litres. However, for most of you, almost all of you now, the 3 litre petrol is gone. Okay, the 3 litre petrol will only come in on the SQ5 and as an initial launch, and then it will disappear. I just did a buyer's guide on this one, so if this is a particularly interesting car for you, then you can watch the video on that. But this is a bit of a different one. So September, October 2016 production begins. For Europe 2017 first deliveries, for the US 2018 first deliveries, for some markets in Southeast Asia, and I can't remember when the Aussies get it, but it's like mid-18 into 2019. So there is quite a sort of a long branch of release for these. It's a bit different to the original Q5, and I think that reflects quite a few things. This is built in Mexico, this one. The factory actually starts there around this time, and that release will see over 1 million vehicles in this generation being built. So really, really impressive from Audi of what they were able to do with the new factory, and the Q5 sort of leading the way with international orders for them. So 2 litre petrol again, 2 litre diesel again, and then we'll come on to the SQ5s. There's a long wheelbase version that I should mention, but only in passing because it goes basically to markets in Asia. That's it. Okay, so for most of you, you're just not going to get it. There's also Sportback that comes out in this generation, and that is going to be on the facelift years. So it won't be for the initial launch. It's not really going to be until about 2021. Manufacturers across the globe seem to do this with their cars, but particularly the German manufacturers, and in all shapes and sizes. You know, the Q8 comes out as basically a Sportback version of a Q7, for example. So yeah, it's not unique in this case. The 2 litre petrol starts to sort of pull away here, particularly because Audi, there's an interest, probably not within the company. I would say in the design phase of this car, I think they still thought that the 2 litre TDI would be dominant throughout its entire sales years. They couldn't foresee what was going to happen in the press. I'm sort of going to go against the crowd here, and I'd say the 2 litre TDI in this generation, it has all the emissions equipment now, so does everything, okay? In this generation, the petrol engine is going to get a petrol particulate filter, generally spoken to as a OPF or a GPF, gas particulate filter. Can't remember what OPF stands for, but a particulate filter. It's a German word, I think. Yeah, but anyway, it doesn't matter. The point being that the additional emissions equipment that would sort of a downside in the first generation of the diesel compared to the petrol, after like 1 year of production, has to be fitted to both. Okay, generally speaking, an OPF filter or a GPF filter lasts much, much, much longer than a DPF filter. That's because there are just more particles coming from a diesel engine due to the way they combust fuel, or I shouldn't really say compress fuel, I suppose, because it's a compression engine, not a combustion engine. Let's not get into that. People are already telling me the videos are too long. So 2 litre TDI. Yeah, I think that would be a good choice for everyone that wants high efficiency, good power, and as you step into the facelifts, you get mild hybrid versions of them. And honestly, when you drive something like a mild hybrid diesel, and then you jump back 10 years, you realise that everything that manufacturers were trying to do with higher and higher performance engines in, say, 2005, you're getting. I mean, it's a marvel what we're doing with engines now, because you drive them on the road and you think, wow, there's just almost instant power all the time, as a mild hybrid diesel sort of keeps the turbo on build for a diesel engine. You don't get that early on, but that's really like motoring journalist speak, you know, of, oh, we're trying to find the absolute edges of a car. Most of the people I ever sold a car to couldn't give one. and possibly you'll find yourself in that spectrum of people as well. I would say the 2 litre TDI on the early years, good engine, not too encumbered. It does have the emissions equipment, but it's not going to be quite old enough yet. I wouldn't say it should still have some life left in them. The petrol engine, though, is a very good choice. And that, again, is because ubiquitous, so part supply is just gigantic, which will help with running costs if you do need to replace something. There are a variety of issues that can crop up, some of them major, some of them more minor. A friend of mine has a Q5 and has been going through, there's a known issue that comes off of the first generation with the thermostats and the oil cooler system. Okay, both of them were causing wider problems and not being identified early enough, and that meant that people were running through quite big bills, which then turned out, you know, they could have saved themselves a lot of time and money if they had just been pointed in the right direction from the off. Didn't happen, and so here we are. Now, from the point of view of what you would want to buy, the SQ5 comes out early. The SQ5 is only for people that want high speed, because it's only a petrol engine. It's not that efficient. Let's just face it, it's not that efficient. It's great fun, but not that efficient. And the 2 litre doesn't step efficiency up massively in 2017 to 20. Once they become mild hybrids, there is this clear, the engine is always looking for ways to be more efficient. And so after 20, I would say lean into the petrols a little bit more. 17 to 20, if you can find one, bearing in mind supply just drops off a cliff during these years because people stop buying them because they're told not to. And so they are a bit harder to find on the used market. And the ones that are there, they demand a little bit of premium. And so it sort of changes depending on market. But for a lot of you, 2018 TDI 2 litre will probably do all you need it to do over the next 3-4 years of your life. For the rest of you though, who, especially if you can do a few repairs on your car yourself, you're probably going to find the 2 litre petrol is best because part supply is huge. Support, if you do have a problem, is huge. They do have a couple of issues, and that's why I would say watch the buyer's guide on this video. Make yourself really aware of what to ask an owner, no matter which engine you're looking at. There's enough of them to walk away from bad ones. Okay, that is, if there's anything I have to say about the second generation, be prepared when you go and see a car to walk away. And yes, that should probably be the case with all cars at all times, but on the Q5, that could change in something that's going to cost you nearly as much as the car, and I'm not kidding. There's been complete engine failures from some of the issues that appear more minor from the off on an engine that otherwise should really have been, you know, better dealt with in the first place. So there we are. The 2 litre TDI, I don't think you really face that so much. So, you know, a bit of 50-50, but again, if you can deal them with yourself, you're probably not going to have a problem with the 2 litre petrol because you'll catch everything early. 2 litre diesel for everyone else. SQ5 people that want a particularly fast car. 3 litre, it's around, but it's not that common. And the 3 litre TDI, it is doing something that the 2 litre isn't doing. Okay, it is more powerful. It is that bit more reliable. It is that one of those engines that really, if you're saying, Miles, I want to buy a car and I want to keep it for the next 10 years, get a 3 litre TDI. It will cost you more to service, but it will get you 10 years down the road. Some people get their 2 litre TDIs down that far and do 400,000 miles in them, but they're generally the anomaly versus the people that get to say 200,000 miles and start to have high costs from emissions equipment, turbochargers and the rest of it. Okay. For those of you that want something fast, the SQ5 becomes a diesel, the oddest thing. So it's petrol 2017 to 2020, no matter where you are in the world. 2020 onwards, or 2021 really, because we know about the supply in 2020. It's still petrol if you're in North America. Everywhere else you go to diesel, pretty much everywhere else. I shouldn't say that actually, I should probably say just Europe, but yeah, no, a lot of the SQ markets then get a diesel option. And this confuses the market massively. It brings, again, the diesel engine is not the 3 litre TDI modified. It is the 3 litre engine completely reworked, has different pistons in it. So, yeah, this is a big change. Is it something that everyone would want to jump into? No. This really is very specific to if you're someone who comes onto the internet, watches videos like this because you just love cars, and you like to have something a bit nice on the driveway. The SQ5 is for you, and if you can get the diesel one, then you will reduce your running costs of having, 300 odd horsepower, V6, not a bad engine tone, everything else. Should that make it the only pick for you? So difficult. Because the petrol one, it's probably a better answer for an enthusiast than the diesel is, because the diesel is still a V6 diesel. And that feels really harsh to say. I just think the fuel economy is better on the diesel. Is it a lot better? Not really. The power is near enough the same. The one thing I would say is that the 3-litre diesel engine, that gets just so much work done to it. I'm not saying the 3-litre petrol isn't a completely different setup, different engine, blah, blah, blah. It's just, I don't know. It's interesting when you're on the journalist side, because you kind of see from the press releases at the time which one a manufacturer was more excited about. To me, it was clearer they were excited about the diesel coming back. And I think that's because they had a load of engineers that had been waiting, that had done the first one, wanted to keep doing it, told, no, we can't do that in 2016, 17, 18. And then the tides change and suddenly they're told, oh, actually, yeah, we probably can do that. There was a little bit of excitement from the brand there. But from your point of view as a buyer, you're going to get a lot more supply probably on the petrol ones. They just supply the diesel ones, just people are not demanding them. You've got lockdowns, you've got everything else going on. And so, yeah, I would probably just look for the best one you can find, and it will probably beat the petrol one. That's the whole of the second generation done. As I say, if you want more details, there's a buyer's guide on that one. Let's move in to the last generation, the one that's just come out in 2024, the third generation Audi Q5. This is the 80A generation. 80A, yeah. Mark Licht, again, is the designer. Hopefully I've said his name correctly this time. It's difficult sometimes. You're trying to store so much in your head, you get things wrong. So yeah, hopefully I've said it right. I did try and say it 5 times before we got on camera. So 3 engines again, 2-litre petrol, 2-litre diesel. 3-litre diesel's gone to 3-litre petrol only. And I'm not that surprised just from the sales. The interesting with the third generation is there's clearly a different look. Each Q5 is really bringing in the newest look of the day. The A5 arguably was doing this before that. So the A5 comes in 2007 with the angel lights. The first one, apart from the R8 obviously, but that comes along at the same time to have these daylight lights that they now run with across, all manufacturers. Of course, Volvo are the history of those. They've always stuck the headlights to stay on. So, but Audi have done it with these daylight lights. A5 does it. Q5 kind of follows in because they're just being released at the same time, although first ones probably don't implement it as well as the A5. Second generation, it's this move forward, this completely different design look, sharper, which comes across the whole Audi range. So you've gone softer first generation, sharper and harder second generation. And now in the third generation, we're softening the design up a little bit again. And I mean, personal opinion, I think that works. Generally speaking, I prefer that softer design to the harder design. You may be different, but that's my personal opinion on it. Newest ones though, all mild hybrids now. And I think the push will really be for the plug-in hybrids. I didn't mention on the previous generation, they also have a plug-in hybrid. That's with the 2-litre petrol engine. Again, not as big a seller as Audi would have wanted, but actually should kick myself because the one thing I meant to say on the second generation, so sorry, let's just step back for a second. I always do this. In the second generation, the most powerful variation that you can buy is not the SQ5. Okay? It's not. Do you want to guess what it is? Yeah, some of you will be right. It's a 55 TFSI E model. Okay, 367 brake horsepower, 2-litre petrol, and a hybrid motor. So yeah, it's more powerful than the SQ5 when the two powers are combined. Bit odd that Audi did that. They do I think it's a 45 in the pre-facelift, then 50 and 55 in the facelift. The 50 is slightly less powerful, like 340 horsepower, and the 55 gets the full whack and all the power, and makes it more powerful than the SQ5. So something to just bear in mind. Coming back to this third generation, it's only been out less than a year at the time I released this video. What I'd say is all mild hybrids, the hybrid is going to get a push with the 2-litre petrol. that same EA AAA running through. Audi seem to have got on top of pretty much every issue they've ever faced with the EA AAA. So they do have some issues back on that previous generation Q5. But if I was to look at reliability across the years, 2007 built, all the way up to 2025 built, the 2-litre petrol, it seems to be the one that people, generally speaking, get furthest and have the least issues with. And that's not because the diesel is unreliable. The diesel generally just has, over its lifespan, emissions equipment wears out. So something to bear in mind there. The 3 litres don't seem to do the mileage, which is bizarre. You'd think they would do the mileage, but the only ones I could find that really sort of got run up the mileage were anomalies, people who are doing 100,000 miles a year, something ridiculous like that, who specifically bought it to do a ton of mileage in and then get rid of it when it was broken. Aside from that, the reason the 2 litres seem to rack up so many miles is that people just keep them and they need them to stay on the road, and so they're paying bills to keep them going, and then the next owner is in the same position. So yeah, just something to note on that one. So last generation, I'd be looking at the petrols. I would still look at the diesel if you have it, but it's looking to me like a narrower and narrower bunch of people. But I think they're going to do the diesels for another few years. There is talk that the diesel will get an extension of life, way past where anyone thought it would. I don't know. And I would just say, if you're a diesel lover, if you've had diesel engines for 20 years now and you don't want to step away from them and you're looking to buy a new Q5, I would buy one now, because I really just do not know what the future holds in this. And I think there's so much talk with how everything has to be for Audi e-tron, so the electric versions, or heavily hybridized. And almost all manufacturers have made the decision. Mercedes were one of the ones that stepped away from this for a little while, that you would do petrol hybrid. Mercedes were doing diesel hybrid, but even they've sort of pulled away from that now, and they're now doing petrol hybrid as well. So yeah, I would say if you want a diesel engine, I'd be getting down to the Audi dealer sooner rather than later. And for some of you, that's just not an option. 2 litre, they will carry you for another few years. They'll do an SQ5 100%. That's why the 3 litre is going to exist. Time of sort of fast to mid-size SUVs is, maybe the sun is setting a little bit on that era, because even the Macan has the 2 litre engine in it now, and it sells amazingly. You just, if you had said to someone in 2004, oh well, one of the most popular cars that Porsche will ever sell will be a 2 litre 4-cylinder SUV, they'd have probably thought that you just woken up backwards and got the world confused and were walking on the ceiling or something. It just wasn't the way the world worked. Now, even with the Macan offered with more powerful options, they're really selling the 2 litre turbo, and I think that is going to continue to happen with the Q5 as well. I think buyers have kind of said, look, most 2 litre turbos now have enough power for them, probably more powerful than most of the buyers of these cars really need or use on the road. And so the 3 litre model, the SQ model, it will still exist, but it's really for people like you who've made it this far into the video and are such car enthusiasts who love these things so much that you want the very best version. Because the days of seeing, like when I worked and in the motor trade, and every manager always wanted to have just whatever the, for the Audi version, it would be whatever the RS or the S was. That's what they wanted. Don't care, just that's what I want. And that's kind of a disappeared mentality now. It's all about efficiency, hybrid, EV, all the other stuff. So that's the world we live in. I like this 3rd generation, but I can't say too much about it yet. All I would say though is sales don't appear to initially have been as strong as Audi may have wanted, but I think there's a little bit of supply-demand thing going on, because over the months that sort of got them away from the launch, it does seem that there's a sudden pickup going on. It's just odd. Usually you have it the other way around. So sort of a surge initially that then tails off. I think the world's maybe just in a bit of an odd place. So we've had sort of a steady build, but it is a continuing build. So you may find that you've just got to wait a little bit further down the road if you want one of these, if you go into a dealer today, but they should still have some stock, which is good. I hope you've enjoyed the video. If you have, consider subscribing, and I shall see you in the next one. Have a very good day until then.